Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about the classical world, classical things, classical education, and
anything else?
Stuff.
And stuff.
And
Hi.
Okay.
And we are your
Wish it was about pie.
three funny teachers who love old stuff and come to you every week with things to talk about from the classical world.
Yep.
In all seriousness, classical education is a very exciting thing in the world of education.
True.
In the world of Christian education. There was actually, I think, like a Christianity Today article that came out recently talking about
classical education.
About classical, I think the clickbaity title was something like "Will classical education or classical education is transforming Christianity?" Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, we were not quoted. But
sorry about that.
Yeah,
your quote didn't make it, is what you're saying.
I
called you about it.
Yeah,
it just didn't include the quote.
It just didn't get in there. Anyway,
Next
my
time.
name is Graham Donaldson, and I am here with my colleagues and beloved brothers, Arthur Jan, AJ Hannenberg.
That's me. Thanks for the extra
I'm just
stank
trying
on
to
it
make sure.
this week.
No, Arthur. If you're wondering, anyway,
What a weird way to do that.
Being formal.
So what's my name?
Thomas Fletcher. TF Magby.
This I will not appreciate making this reference, so I apologize. TFM, does that acronym mean anything to you all?
Nope.
The freaking moon.
Oh yeah. Anyway, this moment has probably passed. That used to be a popular acronym. Total frat move. TFM. Anyway,
no.
Anyway, so I'm glad we've gone past that moment.
Yeah. This is not. I don't know what you're talking about.
Not even.
I'm not.
Vaguely culture. Great. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Anyway,
I'm from a place where fraternities don't exist in Canada.
Are there no fraternities in Canada?
Mm-hmm.
None
and
at all?
AJ is a man of culture.
Yeah, so I'm sure he's a part of a fraternal order.
Yeah. No,
I did live in a house that wanted to be a frat but couldn't be a frat, so we just gave ourselves Greek letters and pretended we were a frat.
It's close enough.
It doesn't exist in Canada at all.
Really? That's
anything.
interesting.
I mean, I'm sure there are like houses
Societies or
that
something,
put
right?
Greek letters in front of them, but the people that join it were like, I watched a movie about American college and I want to join that. But at the University of Toronto, it's like you and the other people who watch that same movie. It's pretty sad. It's not a thing. Anyway.
Yeah. Shout out to my Delta Kappa Chi boys.
Great. Wonderful.
But Thomas,
Okay,
I
do you
feel
think they listen to this podcast?
Oh, heavens no.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thomas, I have an urge to rebuild a broken structure
Good.
and also to eschew all worldly goods.
Wow, good.
Is there somebody that I could look to that would give me a way to structure that
Nope,
desire?
Absolutely no one. Sorry. This is going to be a really short episode then.
Woof.
Oh, bummer. No, actually, of course there is. So today, this is what Graham is referencing. We're going to be talking about Saint Francis. Saint Francis. Okay, so I talked about this before on the episode on Saint Augustine, but at Veritas Academy, the school where all three of us work, there are 4 houses that all students are placed into when they enter the high school. And so I'm going to spend 4 episodes going into who these people are and like why they're important and why they're great. So you can go back and listen to the one on St. Augustine. It was probably 6 or 7 episodes ago at this point. Today we're going to do St. Francis. Now, thankfully, we have the dean of this house, Graham Donaldson.
Hello.
So this fount of knowledge on St. Francis. So I'll just...
Oh, woof.
So actually, I'll
We're just passing it to you, Graham. I hope you're prepared.
So
you ready for
you want to do the
your-
first? Yeah, you take the first 40 minutes. I'll take the back 20. Does that sound good to you? Or
Sure. No.
this
I have one funny St. Francis story that maybe didn't make it into your research that I can share.
is the one about him taking his clothes off?
No, it's
Okay.
the one about him going to Egypt.
Is that the crusade part? Yeah, that's in there.
Aw.
Sorry, you can tell that story when we get
It's
to
all
that
right.
part.
No, it's okay. I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, it's fine. So most of, I guess, if by most I mean all of this, comes from G.K. Chesterton's biography of St. Francis, appropriately titled St. Francis of Assisi. It's a great book. Highly recommend that. This is not a book review because I've never done a book review, but you should definitely go read that book.
Okay, Thomas, I apologize for saying your podcasts are book reviews because you're right. All of our podcasts are book reviews.
I feel like this is, but anyway, that was a comment from like 50 episodes ago.
I know,
so,
but
anyway, what's that about?
Apparently, it's left an indelible impression.
I hate books. Is that all I'm trying to say? Great. I never do book reviews. Okay, so let's talk about St. Francis. Do you think that's lightning? What do you think?
No, it's a rolly.
Cart.
A rolly
somewhere
cart.
around? Okay. Super professional we are. Okay, Saint Francis. Let's kick off with what we know about the guy. Who is this man?
He was the son of a wealthy merchant,
It's true.
or a wealthy, like, who did clothing, like who did
Silk.
fabrics,
Yeah, silk. Yeah,
silk.
yeah. So clothing.
He grew up in Italy.
Yeah.
Talked to his stuffed animals when he was young.
Talks to stuffed animals. That's exactly right.
Seriously?
No, I mean,
Well, that's why he later talked to real animals.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I'm just
I was gonna say, he did talk to real animals.
he did talk to real ones.
Was a soldier as a young man
is true.
in the wars between the city-states. I don't remember which city-states.
Prusia and
Is
another
this
one.
the Guelph Ghibelline thing, or is that completely
It's
different?
Dante, isn't it? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Oh, yeah, it's Dante.
They named his city after how people would make fun of him.
They named it after how
Sissy.
because he's a sissy. Well done, thank you. I was like, wait, how's that work?
That's a bad joke.
he had
I
a-
apologize, listeners.
I was had to think about that one. No, it was good. It was
filled
very
Had a
with shame.
very
dramatic
witty.
conversion, had a vision of rebuilding a church, took it literally, but then realized
Oh, that's
maybe
an
God meant it figuratively.
What an interesting point.
What else? And sort of inaugurated a new holy order into the church that some even I remember when I was first being taught about St. Francis was that because he had such a reformer mentality towards the corruptions of the church, or the excesses of the church, that it kind of continued or started the ball rolling of wanting to reform the church, and then maybe that
Went poorly
went poorly. Yeah,
after he died.
after he died, then
Yeah.
there was a bunch of heretics.
Yeah, the Fraticelli.
Fraticelli.
Yeah. So that went.
Which sounds like when you're in an Italian restaurant and it's one of those
Oh,
dishes and you're
yeah.
like, oh man,
Should they get the-
Fraticelli.
yeah, I'll take the fraticelli.
Or the fettuccine?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can't remember what the fraticelli noodle looks like,
Is that the one that looks like a shell?
or the little squiggles.
Yeah, it's kind of like all Italian words, though, isn't
A
it?
big thick tube.
I like that.
Those ones hold the sauce the
All
best.
filled with cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all Italian words end up sounding like a food, but I dig it. Okay, cool. So, sure.
Wow.
Ferrari.
Call it, yeah. Yes, my favorite. My favorite. I am slowly, very, very slowly learning Italian through Duolingo. So that's been my one observation.
Duolingo is getting Latin,
Duolingo has Latin,
but Duolingo is getting it's in the Latin. It's in beta right now.
correct, but it's on there. You can
Oh,
sign
man,
up for it
alive.
now.
I'm so stoked.
Yeah, just do it. Sign up.
All right, I'm going to tune you out for a little bit.
It's okay. You do that anyway. Okay, so at least you'll be doing something productive. Okay, so Saint Francis.
Agricolas.
I feel like tuning out anyway. Whatever. Thank you for what's
Sorry.
when you say Agricola, I think of the board game. What does that word actually mean?
Huh? Agricola means farmer.
Farmer. That makes sense. It's a board game about farming
I got it on my mind, if I'm being farmer.
because you are a farmer indeed. Okay, so Saint Francis, born in the late 12th century. He we already talked about this. He's born to a silk merchant that is Pietro Bernardone. That's my wonderful Italian accent. We've already covered all this. That he is born into this life of wealth and some kind of like presumed success might be the right word for it. That he will follow in his father's footsteps, but he has to kind of prove himself first, and that's where we get into these like military stories that Graham is talking about. There are just to mention, Chesterton's biography of Saint Francis is not. I'd say it's probably about half actually the story of St. Francis and half like reflections on the story of St. Francis.
Welcome to Chesterton.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, yeah.
Does it meander by any chance?
Quite deeply.
Is he sort of all over the
Yeah.
place?
He also, and he repeats over and over the same like verbal pattern of, he will introduce a paradox to say Francis was not this, but he was this, but he does it like 10 times. Which is endearing and wonderful, but just to say
Francis was not a manly man, but he was a man of men. And
that.
you're like, oh, what?
what does that even mean? Yeah, because the first time he does it, you're like, oh wow, and then you got one.
Yeah.
Sounds like Chesterton.
Yeah.
I thought AJ was going to have one too, but yeah,
We love Chesterton, just for those who are listening. We love him, but Chesterton is like espresso. I can only have one cup. I want to have more.
Yeah.
But if I do, I get weird.
Yeah. I think we've talked about before. I had a hard time getting through Orthodoxy when we read that as a Veritas book group, however long ago that was. And so for my first time through, the St. Francis biography was an audiobook, and I found it just delightful to listen to have a British man read to me his thoughts on St. Francis.
That would make sense.
So maybe try that if reading the book itself is too much for you, dear listener. Okay, so So, speaking of meandering, Chesterton opens his biography not by starting with the life or the birth of St. Francis, because that would make too much sense, but he spends time drawing out he says that no biography of St. Francis could actually start at that point, because Francis was not just about himself, it was about his time, whatever that means. So what is happening around the life of St. Francis that matters to him?
So what's the year 12?
What?
What's his year that he was born?
1181 when he was
1181. Oh, okay.
1181 or 1182,
Okay.
somewhere around there.
That's when he was born?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was sort of kicking around doing his thing in the early 1200s?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're saying this was before cell phones?
Before, just a little bit. Thank you. Good.
A little bit.
We have oriented ourselves. This is wonderful. Okay. Chesterton says, the reader cannot even begin to see the sense of a story that may well seem to him a very wild one until he understands that to this great mystic, his religion was not a thing like a theory, but a thing like a love affair. We'll get into the details of what makes Francis like that. I guess I'll save that quote for a while. Chesterton spends time talking about just a kind of a sense of oldness that the church had at this time, that any kind of authentic faith was not generally valued or important or necessary. He has the creed was still being repeated after the victory or escape, but it is not unnatural to suppose that there was something a little monotonous about the repetition. The church looked old then as now, and there were some who thought her dying as now. In truth, orthodoxy was not dead, but it may have been dull. It is certain that some people began to think it dull. So this is the context he's born into. And in this, again, Francis is born into a life where religion is around his life, but is not particularly important to him. Graham referenced the story before. One day, St. Francis is walking by. He's just walking around, and he walks by a church. Where did my
like a ruined church, a rundown abbey or something?
Yeah, exactly. And so, as he's walking by this, he himself is not thinking anything of it, but he hears a voice, and that voice tells him, "Francis, seest thou not that my house is in ruins? Go and restore it for me." So I guess we'll do it this way. I have 3 stories about St. Francis. We'll go through each of these and then talk about what's interesting about them. So Francis sees this rundown church, and he wants to fix it. He, again, what Graham said, takes literally that statement. So he goes and he takes some of his dad's stuff. He takes some of his dad's horses and some of his dad's silk.
Against his father's knowledge, right?
His father has no idea this is happening. And Francis goes and sells all those things, and then with the intention of using that money toward buying stuff for this church. Francis's father, understandably, is upset by this, and so has him thrown into a jail, essentially. I think it's under the house. There's some details about it. Anyway, he
threw him into a jail under their own house?
Yeah. So he's
you didn't have that?
Yeah, is that not normal?
Basement jail?
Yeah. Why not?
In the Northwest, yeah, but
totally
here it's hard to build a basement jail.
Well, Central Italy, maybe that's more normal. But Francis is locked up for a few days. Francis's father then pulls him out, takes him in front of the local bishop, and tells the bishop, "Hey, make my son apologize for what he did." And the bishop does make him apologize for that, mostly because what Francis did was, in fact, wrong.
Yeah, he took his dad's stuff.
He took his dad's stuff.
Theft.
Yeah, exactly. So the bishop says, "Hey, Francis, you should apologize for this." And Francis's response, which anyway, you all have heard me talk about this in assembly. It's a thing that's been bouncing around my head since I first came upon the story. But this is Francis's response. He stood up before them all and said, "Up to this time, I have called Pietro Bernardone father, but now I am the servant of God. Not only the money, but everything that can be called his, I will restore to my father, even the very clothes he has given me." And he rent off all his garments, except one, and they saw that it was a hair shirt. So so Graham's heard of her. I think the version of the story Graham has said is that he doesn't have anything on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but this version that's told is the origin of where the Franciscan outfit comes from. That brown looking robe thing that you see, that's all he had left on. That's all he had for himself as he rent off his garments. So he does that. He piled the garments in a heap on the floor and threw the money on top of them. So he does return the money. Then he turned to the bishop and received his blessing like one who turns his back on society, and according to the account, went out as he was into the cold world. Apparently it was literally a cold world at the moment, and snow was on the ground. A curious detail, very deep in its significance, I fancy, is given in the same account of this great crisis in his life. He went out half naked in his hair shirt into the winter woods, walking the frozen grounds between the frosty trees, a man without a father. He was penniless, he was parentless. He was to all appearance without a trade or a plan or a hope in the world. And as he went under the frosty trees, he burst suddenly into song. So as he is losing all of his success, as he is losing everything that would guarantee for him a comfortable life, his reaction isn't despair, his reaction isn't sadness, his reaction is to burst into song.
He is a bit of a hippie.
He is a hippie.
St. Francis.
Well, that's what, I mean,
No, it's true.
let's follow that a little bit. Like,
I can
but
hear
even
that.
so, like there was a movie that was made in the late 60s or early 70s about the life of St. Francis, but they're definitely like recasting him as like a hippie, the way that we have hippies in the 60s and 70s. What's it? Brother, Sun, Father, Sister, Moon, or something like that?
That's the name of
the movie.
Interesting. Okay.
And I've never seen it, but I remember I've just heard people talk about it, and it's less about St. Francis and more about like hippies, and like we can be hippies too, Catholics. I don't know. It was more of a movie that was about its own time that it was made, as opposed to the life, some sort of life of St. Francis.
Right.
Interesting.
But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, do you think we should dress less flashy?
There we go. Sure.
Do you think that
You're just too classy a gentleman?
I don't know. I sometimes think about this. Sometimes I think like I should just only wear like white shirts and black pants, or just have like a whole closet of the same simple clothes.
I think you're doing us all a favor when you dress that up.
What does that mean?
You mean my body?
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you. Okay, great.
I mean, it just makes it a little easier to look at.
I appreciate that.
So it's less
I'm just
miserable
kidding.
to
But
like.
maybe my
see it.
ugliness-
Should we? Yeah, that was.
But maybe my ugliness
is.
is can help is a sanctifying force. You're reminded of like what age can do.
Okay, great.
Anyway, should we dress simpler?
But no matter your reason
know.
for wanting to do
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah, I know.
So, but maybe this is great. So, Graham, your joking question off the bat was, I want to live an ascetic life. Do I have an example for me? And there's one way of telling the story of St. Francis where you say, yes, there is an example of someone who turned their back on all the success, all the stuff, and was happy. And you can tell that story in a way to totally miss the point.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying in that movie that you're referencing. So, sure, you could dress more simply. Why do you want to dress more simply? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
The most common version of it is, wasn't it? I think it was President Obama who only has one type of outfit that he wears. He has 20 sets of it, but it's the same suit that he has 20 times over.
That one time he wore that tan suit. Remember that tan suit?
That was a
a huge deal.
Yeah.
President wore a tan
Really?
suit to like a meeting, and people were like,
Whoa.
What's he doing? Yeah.
Like-
But the reason
What are you, a ferry boat captain?
"Catch more flies with honey."
is that what that is? But the
You catch more honeys about being fly.
I don't understand
Graham,
what's happening
sorry.
right now. I don't like this at all. But the reason given for that is to limit your energy expended in making a decision. It's not like, the purpose of it is to like make you happier, not anything beyond that.
Yeah.
So that doesn't make it a bad choice to dress simpler, though. I don't know. If we were
I think if you're doing it to draw attention, it comes to the same like.
to your simplicity,
Yeah, just it sounds to me like letting everyone know that you're fasting with an email blast, right?
yeah. I mean, and then that.
I'll stop doing that too.
Could you please? That would be wonderful. But,
I've been meaning to talk to you about your email blasts.
yeah, but that doesn't. But still, his example is to leave those things behind him. There's again, there's something. So
It's the hardcoreness of Francis that always
that's appealing, right?
Is appealing and always like freaks me out.
Yeah, but that's. And part of it is funny that you're the dean of the House of Francis because Francis was not particularly intellectual, right? And you are. That's what I say is the funny part. You are. Whatever. Stop. So,
Good dresser,
what's that?
a flaunter of wealth.
Okay, great. So you are immoral in all the way. No, I'm just saying. Sorry, but yeah, Francis was not like particularly well read. He, I think, somewhat notoriously did not see the value in reading a whole lot when he had God and had the Bible. Like he didn't need a lot more than that. So there's a simplicity there. Anyway, you are very different from St. Francis.
It's true.
is all that to say. Okay, I dig it. All right,
I should have been the house of Thomas Aquinas.
Anyway, Aquinas would be a wonderful house.
Francis is great too.
Francis is great as well. Some students make jokes about there being a house of Thomas Aquinas for how much I reference Thomas Aquinas. So I think I would be okay with that. Okay, so what other stories do we see of St. Francis? So, Donaldson, I guess I made reference to this before in public
formal.
And pointed this to you. Did you ever end up, there's a story about him in a market. Did you ever end up looking the story
I
up?
did not.
Okay, good. So this one I will attempt to bounce around in so that I don't, otherwise it's a big block of text. But one of the earliest glimpses we have of him shows him as simply selling bales of cloth from a booth in the market, which his mother may or may not have believed to be one of the habits of princes. The first glimpse of the young man in the market is symbolic in more ways than one. An incident occurred, which is perhaps the shortest and sharpest summary that could be given of a certain curious thing which were a part of his character, long before it was transfigured by transcendental faith. While he was selling velvet and fine embroideries to some merchant of the town, a beggar came imploring alms, evidently in a somewhat tactless manner. It was a rude and simple society and there were no laws to punish a starving man for expressing his need for food, such as have been established in a more humanitarian age. Isn't that good? I thought that was. And the lack of any organized police permitted such persons to pester the wealthy without any great danger. So anyway, he's talking with a merchant. This fellow who has no money is asking for money. It's viewed as rude that he's interrupting their conversation because he's hungry. Anyhow, Francis was evidently torn two ways with the botheration of two talkers, but finished his business with the merchant somehow, and when he had finished it, found the beggar was gone. Francis leapt from his booth, left all the bales of velvet and embroidery behind him, apparently unprotected, and went racing across the marketplace like an arrow from the bow. Still running, he threaded the labyrinth of the narrow and crooked streets of the little town, looking for his beggar, whom he eventually discovered, and loaded the astonished mendicant with money. Then he straightened himself, so to speak, and swore before God that he would never, all his life, refuse help to a poor man. The sweeping simplicity of this undertaking is extremely characteristic. Never was any man so little afraid of his own promises. His life was one riot of rash vows that turned out right. So this is before he is like actually Christian or saved, but they're just these glimpses of him being someone who is giving, who's willing to make bold promises like that. There's something in this that I want to pose to you all. So when we at a classical school talk about the liberal arts, we call them that because they make a man free. Mm-hmm. And there's something in Francis that is free, that he is not slave to wealth or his family and is willing to turn his back on those for a greater good.
He definitely has the temperament, an extreme temperament. He has a temperament of basically just not caring about what people think of him.
Yep.
I don't know if it's not a criticism because you wouldn't criticize him for this because of ultimately what he did, but it is incredibly difficult to also think about him abandoning his family.
Sure.
Or incredibly sad to think that he saw himself in this position where loyalty to family and loyalty to God were now incompatible. Mm-hmm. That's a rough decision to have to make.
I don't think he necessarily cooked that up, though.
I don't think he cooked it up either.
His father, I mean, if my kid stole my truck and sold it to help repair a church, I'd be probably a little hacked. But at least it was for a good cause.
He's not going to basement jail?
Lock you up.
No,
yeah.
I'm not going to put him in basement jail. I'm going to say, look, man, next time you want to help out a church, just give me a holler. Just, tell me before you sell my Chevy.
Fair.
Right? I think his father had an idea of what he wanted Francis to turn out to be, and Francis had contrary ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think it seems like he had a lot of ideas contrary to the practical wisdom of the age, right? Mm-hmm. Don't leave your booth. Mm-hmm. Don't give a whole bunch of money to a poor man. Don't do all these things, right?
Yep.
I don't know. I really like that he is not burdened with the mores of his time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but what I'm curious about is, would we appreciate people following this example? So he is stepping on
I think we always appreciate it in retrospect, but when it's the guy in the moment, you don't appreciate it. Or at least I don't appreciate it.
Or maybe there are maybe two ways to phrase it. There's that, but maybe the other way is, so I gave so we have a monthly chapel for our students, and during the chapel, I brought in that story of Francis cutting ties with his father, and I was talking with someone else at the school about that before getting up on stage to do that, and he was saying he was like worried about, you are going to put this example in front of students, right? You're going to give students an out for them like disrespecting their parents by being able to say, I'm actually doing it. I'm like serving God by dishonoring my parents. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. So then I'm wondering is there something dangerous in Francis that actually shouldn't be replicated?
How old was Francis?
I can try and figure that out.
When he did that? Because I feel like that's a big...
So when would it be okay for him to have done that?
I think that vow might be rash when you're 16, but reasonable when you're 24. Like to leave parents, because I feel that in those early years, 16, 17, 18, you tend to have little mercy for your elders. You feel like you know what's right and wrong, and you haven't lived long enough to see your own failings really take root and wreak havoc in the world. And so I don't know, I think as you grow, you have a little bit more mercy for the failings of people older than you, because you have begun to see your own as you grow. And so when you hit 24, your family has really had a chance to give you the room to go out and do what you want to do.
Yeah.
If you're 24 and they're still not letting you follow God how you want to follow God, it seems like that's an appropriate time to break ties. But to rashly break ties with your family at 16 because maybe you misunderstood what your dad is the virtues your dad is trying to instill in you, that seems a little bit rash to me.
If I'm looking at these dates correctly, he is at least 22. He's probably 23 or 24 at the youngest, and could be slightly older than that.
Yeah, that sounds to me like, you're already supposed to be graduated college, right? It's time. It's time to sort of pave your own way. And if your parents are still resisting your desire to follow God as a vocation, I think at that point it might be appropriate to say like, well, it's time to go do something else.
Yeah. And I cut some of the sections from Chesterton's account where it's made more clear that Pietro Bernardone is not only not Christian, but like opposed to supporting Christianity.
Yeah,
so,
there you go.
Yeah, it's more, there are reasons for the split between the two. But again, we can see this with 800 years later and able to like discuss what the story means. But again, is there a danger to following after this example? If a student goes through the school and says, actually, I'm going to like sell all my stuff and not follow the worldly path of success, I don't know.
I'm all for that.
Would you?
Yeah.
You would have no worries of like, are you sure about that?
For sure we would have are you sure about that conversation? Not because you want to, like, are they doing it because they saw, like, #vanlife on Instagram and thought that sounded great?
Something they wanted to do.
No, because, like, they're it's for the wrong reasons. It's sort of this aspirational, like, I don't want nobody to tell me how to live my life. I'm going to, that's sort of the wrong reason. But if it's actually because of not only a sanctification of self, but also a life of service, then I don't think I wouldn't.
Freshman year, during our very first day of class, when we talk about the reason for education, I reiterate that like if you decide to leave this high school and sell everything you own and spend the rest of your life in poverty serving the poor, I will is that a failing of your education? And they eventually say no. And I'm like, so I don't really care if that's what you do. I will feel as though I have been a success.
Do they start out saying that it would be a failure? Like, do they take convincing to come to that position?
No, usually they recognize that is a virtuous thing, right? Living your life in service of others, even if it means you don't have a big car and a big house. But when you ask them what is the definition of education, success is one of the first words that comes up on the board.
Yep.
And so I'm like, so clearly success might not mean material goods. It means something else. And education must serve something else. And so to prove that, I present in front of them this life of servitude that they know is good, that usually doesn't take convincing.
Yeah.
And
I like that. So maybe there are levels here. So at one level, to say I am free of the need for wealth and the need for luxury is a good, and that is separate from the religious life of St. Francis. So that would line up with a classical, which is to say pagan understanding of like a good person is one who is free from slavery to money, wealth, luxury, whatever. So I think at that level, that is a true thing that you can take from Francis's life. But there's a next step to it.
Well, the difficulty with kids, with teenagers, is that they expect that when we give a example, we mean it as the only example.
Yes.
So there is the example of the well-lived Christian life of somebody who has the extremes of Francis.
Yeah.
And then there is somebody who has the well-lived Christian life who has the extremes of George Mueller. George Mueller is another version of an extreme kind of believer, if you want to put it in that sort of a stupid way to phrase it.
Yeah.
But then there are also examples of the Christian life of that have more of a conventional way about their life. I'm trying to I don't know. The examples don't have to just be these extreme actions of radical poverty.
Sure.
Because so then the education needs to be one that can educate and fill up the life of the child who's going to go off and be Francis.
Yes.
And fill up the life of the child who's going to go off and be a good Christian father and husband and small business owner or whatever, right, in the heart of Texas. So like there's and then it also needs to be an education that goes and humanizes the person who is going to go off and be incredibly worldly successsul, because that's going to happen with some of these kids.
Sure.
And they need to be virtuous as well. So when we hold up the model, we don't want to hold it up as like this is sort of like they for those of you like Christianity, this is like how you do it. And those who don't, just do your own thing.
No. That's helpful. So to say that the example of St. Francis is not only for those who will sell all of their possessions, leave their family, and found a religious order, right?
Yeah.
His example is not only for them. Even the wealthy person needs to have a right view toward that wealth. And that's, Francis was still accumulating money, but for the purpose of rebuilding a church. Mm-hmm. So anyway, this is helpful. I like this. That's a good way of looking at it. The next step I was going to take that to is that I think, again, it's fine to take any of those points away from it. To be free from being controlled by money is a good thing. But there's a next step of like why Francis himself was actually doing any of this stuff. And that's, I'll just read the quote. "It is the highest and holiest of the paradoxes that the man who really knows he cannot pay his debt will be forever paying it. He will be forever giving back what he cannot give back and cannot be expected to give back. He will be always throwing things away into a bottomless pit of unfathomable thanks. Men who think they are too modern to understand this are in fact too mean to understand it. We are most of us too mean to practice it. We are not generous enough to be ascetics. One might almost say not genial enough to be ascetics. A man must have magnanimity of surrender, of which he commonly only catches a glimpse in first love, like a glimpse of our lost Eden." So, yes, Francis was free of those desires, but he was also giving it because of something he wanted. When he gave up all of his wealth, he got more in that moment than he gave up. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair way to phrase that? Mm-hmm. And so I think there's an example in that, and this is more a religious point, so I don't know, skip ahead if you don't want to talk about this. But I just think the example that's given of sacrifice here is so helpful to see that Francis is not just giving things up because like he should. He's giving things up because what he gets is more. He bursts into song the moment he walks away from everything. And I think that is a model for what we get out of that sacrifice.
And we have like secular versions of this, right? Mm-hmm. Like those movies of the guy who's got the high-paying job and he's got all of the pressures, and then he either gets fired or he has some sort of epiphany and he realizes like the simple life of family is what I've wanted all along. Merry Christmas, right? Like we have the secular version of that type of realization that, oh my goodness, the game I'm playing or the system that I'm in is not a healthy, happy one, and it's not giving me the life that I wanted. But Francis has the added layer of this, which is, in those movies, they hold up another good, my sort of tongue-in-cheek reference to being like family. I think of Family Man. Remember the Nicolas Cage movie Family Man?
Yeah, sure.
Right. So then the idea being that living for family, even though it's crazy and chaotic, is more meaningful. Yeah. But Francis has the ultimate answer, which is the life lived wholly for God, and to giving up everything that sort of hinders that is one that ultimately is fulfilling now and forever.
Yeah. No,
so hence the bursting into song.
Yeah, this all ties in with what we talked about. Those 2 back-to-back episodes of Praise of Folly and Discipline were very helpful for me to understand. Again, the point of the Discipline episode is that discipline is not an end in and of itself. Discipline is like toward and for something. And Praise of Folly was one of many points was that there needs to be some like amount of action in a person. Like you must be pulled out of yourself towards something, and you're pulled toward things you want. Does that make that's a better motivation than to say I'm running away from things I don't want? So,
yeah, I think that's similar to the point that you made about the student, right? If the student is giving up everything because they don't want to be a part of the system anymore, and they're tired of everything, and they don't like people, and they want to be doing that's maybe not the best reason to sell all your stuff and go live on the land. But if you are running towards a life of servitude because you know that's what you want, and that all the things that you have are hindering you from this life of servitude, then that's probably a better reason, right?
Yeah, actually, Thomas, we were even talking about this before the podcast started. We do our students a disservice by only painting for them one possibility of the Christian life. And we could put as fine a point if we wanted on it. I'm sure people who have grown up in the same kind of Protestant circles that we've grown up in know sort of what we're talking about when we say there's like this Christianese way of expectation of living, and I don't even want to get into it, but I think we do our students, and we also sort of do the modern church a disservice by saying there's really only one way to live and be Christian in your lifetime. So there are other ways to do it. And be faithful. Anyway, yeah.
Part of me wonders what you mean when you say. I feel like someone could listen to this very easily and say, "Well, a bunch of relativists sitting around talking about how you can do whatever you want to."
No, I mean, I guess maybe to sort of just thinking about very basically like. Intentional communities, right? Like new monasticism that sort of propped up and came around the early 2000s. I don't really know how it's doing these days, but there was people in our church that I remember in Toronto that were successful people who college educated, had sort of paths to the middle class. And they all sort of said, what we're going to do is we're going to buy houses in a really poor neighborhood. We're all going to basically do everything except take a vow. Like we're going to dedicate ourselves to being in there, and we're going to take more of a life of poverty, living and then establishing roots in a neighborhood in order to live life together. And that harder road will be sanctifying and will also be a benefit for the city. So there's examples like that. And I remember at the time being like, that's hard. Right. And that sounds crazy. And I don't want to do that. And a lot of people sort of said, "Oh, what's wrong? Oh, like you're weird. This is a weird way of like that's not. You don't have to do that. That's not something you have to do to be Christian, is it?
Right.
That kind of fear.
Right. But then to flip that and say it's a thing. Again, Francis did not have to give up his wealth. Francis did not have to disown your father. Is that the right phrase? He didn't have to walk away from all that, but he did, and he got something out of that. It was better for him to have done that than to not have done that, to have that open view toward the life he had. And that's I think what you're getting at is that we're offered that also. The Christian life isn't this like, I have to pray, I have to read my Bible, I have to do these things. It's we get to know God.
Or maybe it's like, there's not just one way to live your Christian life, and you just need to figure it out. And if you don't, you sort of lived a crappier Christian life, and God's going to be like, here's what you could have done. This would have been better. I don't know. I feel like a lot of Christians have the same fear that people, or the same sort of hesitancy that people have when they start playing like a very long and involved game, like a role-playing game. Like, I want to min-max this thing. Like, I want to have the best optimal path of playing this game that you can have. Whereas, like, Francis made decisions about how he was going to live and got God because he was seeking after God. And you could conceive that Francis, if he had sort of kept his wealth used his wealth to have an influence for God in the city, and then also decided that he was going to play a long game of reconciliation with his father. Like that could have been a Christian life too. God could have been so like if you were honestly seeking after God, the choose your own adventure life is going to have happy and not happy. You may not be happy the whole way through, but it is going to be a life of satisfaction and a life of worth. Let's put it that way.
Sure. But what he did not have to be the only way. It's not the only example for Christians. Not everyone has to do what Francis did. Is that? I think there is something deeper going on, again, of an openness with those things, not clinging to what a person has. But that doesn't mean you have to follow the exact choices that he makes. Is that fair? Okay. We're kind of dancing around a quote that Lewis makes. These are the opening lines of The Weight of Glory. So there's no context you're missing, I promise. If you ask 20 good men today what they thought the highest of the virtues, 19 of them would reply unselfishness. But if you asked almost any of the great Christians of old, he would have replied love. You see what has happened? A negative term has been substituted for a positive, and this is of more than philological importance. The negative ideal of unselfishness carries with it the suggestion not primarily of securing good things for others, but of going without them ourselves, as if our abstinence and not their happiness was the important point. I do not think this is the Christian virtue of love. The New Testament has lots to say about self-denial, but not about self-denial as an end in itself. So, anyway, so there you go for Francis 1. Okay, so we will move toward a final story. This is kind of, maybe intermission is the story that Graham wants to tell.
Is this the story where he goes to Damietta?
You can tell that one, and then the final one is the stigmata, his like final.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So Damietta, so there was a crusade going on, and we're going to be talking about the Crusades in the next podcast. We're going to be starting a series, maybe a two-parter on the life of the Templars.
Spoilers.
A 20-parter?
Two-parter.
It's going to be a Plantagenet 25-part series.
Plantagenets ended because King Henry IV is now king, and he is not technically a Plantagenet. We can do the War of the Roses if you want to.
Sure.
I do.
That sounds great. Seriously.
Here we go. Well, buckle up for blood.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about a little bit about the Templars. Yeah, fair point. And so the Crusades, terrible thing.
Right.
And there was a siege going on in a city called Damietta, which is right on the coast of Egypt on the Mediterranean. And so the Templars were there, and they were fighting whoever they were fighting in Egypt at the time. And Francis goes, and he's like, I'm going to end the crusade by converting the Muslims. And so he goes and in his poor outfit with his bare feet, he travels all the way to Egypt. And he goes to the sort of headquarters of the leading. Is
that the Saracens?
The Saracens or whoever it was. I can never keep all of the different.
Chesterton just calls him the Sultan.
Yeah, I can never keep all the different sects in my head. But he goes to whoever was the other opposing force in the crusade at the time, and he asks to speak to the Sultan, to the head, and his men kind of, laughingly say, "Yeah, sure thing, buddy, come on in." And they let him in. And
nice clothes, weirdo.
Yeah, exactly. And
Seriously.
then Francis gives a 2-day-long impassioned speech about sort of the virtues of Christian life. And the Sultan was very conciliatory and was very kind and, treated Francis very well and gave him a place to sleep and listened to him and entertained him. And then when Francis was done, so Francis is like, "So, are you in?"
Baptism?
Yeah.
Seriously.
And the Sultan was like, "No, thank you. We'll continue the crusade." And then Francis went home. But Francis just had in his mind, if I just talk to him, if I just talk to him and present Christ, maybe we can end this whole bloodshed. There's a chance. Didn't work.
But hey, he gave it a good college try,
He gave it a
right?
good college try. And it was probably the better way than what the Templars were doing, which was
But also, the crazy part of the story to me is that Francis was not killed as a part of this.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
But so there, the way that sort of the tradition has taken hold is that, despite the religious difference, there was still a recognition of Francis, not just his simplicity, but his sort of purity of heart.
Sure.
And it's like, why do I need to kill this person?
Right.
Yeah, there's no reason. I mean, what are you going to take from him?
Unless he's some hero. Anyway.
Unless you have this view
You're killing
of
a hero of the opposition.
Exactly.
Right,
But that's not really how... we'll talk about that next podcast, because that's sort of our popular conception of the Crusades, is that it was a war of hatred between religious differences, and that's not what it was.
And I mean, if you kill Francis, all you're going to do is like create a martyr for the other side.
Yes.
I feel like that is the worst decision you could make as a leader. You gain nothing from it. Like, he's not leading any troops. He doesn't have any secrets that you can torture out of him. Mm-hmm. The only thing you do is make everybody really mad because this guy was really nice, right? That's the only possible thing you could do. So hearing him out and then saying, no thanks, baptism isn't my style, seems like a better decision.
Sure, makes sense. All right, so that's a story from close to the end of Francis's life. The final big story of his life, I'll read through here. These next series of quotes you might hear me quoting for a while. Subject, however, to truly sacred doubts, I will confess that to me personally, this one solitary and indirect report, which he's about to say, that has come down to us reads very like the report of something real, of some of those things that are more real than what we call daily realities. Even something, as it were, double and bewildering about the image seems to carry the impression of an experience shaking the senses, as does the passage in Revelation about the supernatural creature full of eyes. Okay, it would seem that Saint Francis beheld the heavens above him, occupied by a vast winged being like a seraph, spread out like a cross. There seems some mystery about whether the winged figure was itself crucified or in the posture of crucifixion, or whether it merely enclosed in its frame of wings some colossal crucifix. But it seems clear that there was some question of the former impression, for St. Bonaventura distinctly says that St. Francis doubted how a seraph could be crucified, since those awful and ancient principalities were without the infirmity of the passion. St. Bonaventura suggests that the seeming contradiction may have meant that St. Francis was to be crucified as a spirit, since he could not be crucified as a man. But whatever the meaning of the vision, the general idea of it is very vivid and overwhelming. St. Francis saw above him, filling the whole heavens, some vast, immemorial, unthinkable power, ancient like the Ancient of Days, whose calm men had conceived under the forms of winged bulls or monstrous cherubim, and all that winged wonder was in pain like a wounded bird. This seraphic suffering, as it is said, pierced his soul with a sword of grief and pity. It may be inferred that some sort of mounting agony accompanied the ecstasy. Finally, after some fashion, the apocalypse faded from the sky, and the agony within subsided, and silence and the natural air filled the morning twilight and settled slowly in the purple chasms and cleft abysses of the... I don't know the name of the mountain, sorry. The head of the solitary sank amid all that relaxation and quiet in which time can drift by with the sense of something ended and complete. And as he stared downward, he saw the marks of nails in his own hands. That's the end of one chapter, the end of the very beginning, just 2 sentences of the next chapter. The tremendous story of the stigmata of St. Francis, which was the end of the last chapter, was in some sense the end of his life. In a logical sense, it would have been the end even if it had happened at the beginning. But truer traditions refer it to a later date and suggest that his remaining days on the earth had something about them of the lingering of a shadow. So he has this incredible religious experience, and then
crazy vision,
and then it's almost there's no point to anything else in his life after having seen that. To have been to come face to face with, again, the Ancient of Days is the way that Chesterton's describing it there.
And then the vision manifests itself bodily on him, and he has the wounds
of Christ.
The wounds of Christ, which is, I mean, kind of crazy.
I think kind of crazy is the exact. I mean, that's my reaction to hearing that story.
Yeah.
Maybe you two are too polite to be like, that doesn't sound like a thing that happened.
Oh, I had to, because this story deserves reverence, I had to keep back the joke I wanted to say at the end of it, which was, I'm not saying it's aliens.
Okay. Wonderful.
Because this, if you've ever watched the History Channel thing, it's this sort of thing that they pull out and they say, well, what is it he could have possibly seen? And they say it must have been aliens, right? Yeah. It sounds totally crazy, but I don't know. We've talked about how the world itself is a magical place, and the only reason we think it's not magical is because we've gotten too used to the magic. That we can plant a seed in the ground and a tree comes forth is total insanity. Yeah. And I try my absolute very best to not disbelieve the magic of the old world simply because I haven't seen it with my own eyes, and not remove magic from the world simply because I am incredulous.
That's fair. Chesterton, so he presents this story kind of just objectively, says this is a thing that happened, and then explores, AJ, essentially what you just said of, so do we trust this story? Do we trust that this story happened? And he opened the story with this, it sounds real, is one of the things he says. And another is that he is willing to trust the words of, I thought it was Bonaventure, but it says here Bonaventura anyway. So to trust the words of St. Bonaventura in one paragraph, but not trust the words in the next paragraph seems inconsistent, right? To say, this is where he's like telling the truth and this is where he's lying, or whatever the right term would be. It's unfair to those saints who are recounting it. And then this ties in with that. This is a quote from, I think it's the first chapter. It's much earlier in the book, but references this scene. This is when Chesterton was talking about how people have trouble telling the biography of Francis, and this is why. These distinguished writers found things like the stigmata a stumbling block, because to them a religion was a philosophy. It was an impersonal thing, and it is only the most personal passion that provides here an approximate earthly parallel. A man will not roll in the snow for a stream of tendency by which all things fulfill the law of their being. He will not go without food in the name of something, not ourselves, that makes for righteousness. He will do things like this, or pretty like this, under quite a different impulse. He will do these things when he is in love. The first fact to realize about St. Francis is involved with the first fact with which his story starts, that when he said from the first that he was a troubadour and said later that he was a troubadour of a newer and nobler romance, he was not using a mere metaphor, but understood himself much better than the scholars understand him. So a thing we've danced around is to say that the deeper point of Francis is that he was driven by a radical love toward the things that were important to him, God primarily, obviously, but he was drawn toward things. He was not scared of that wealth and had to leave it behind, but he was constantly running before him and was confident of receiving the object of his love. So that is St. Francis.
I appreciate your focus on sort of a spiritual narrative there. There are plenty of other stories about Francis, right?
Of course, naturally, true.
There's one where he's preaching and
to the animals, right?
Well, there's one where he preaches to the animals. There's another where he's preaching to people, and the birds will not shut up. And so he just says essentially like, "Hey, can you keep it down? I'm preaching here," and the birds are silent the rest of the time. There's another one where there's a wolf that has been harassing a town and eating kids and stuff, or goats or whatever. He's just not a great wolf.
Right.
And so they call Francis in, and he goes and he has a sit down chat with the wolf and just says, "Hey man, you got to leave these people alone. It's just not chill what you're doing." And the wolf never harasses them again.
Which is why the Francis at Veritas, our mascot, is the wolf.
Yeah, because he talked with wolves, and he used to talk to animals all the time and seemed to have an easy congress with them. So.
I guess I probably didn't say that during our previous episode. So the animal associated with the House of St. Augustine is the phoenix. So then Francis is the wolf. So I guess I should mention that when we go through that too. Good call. Yeah, there are many more stories to tell about Francis.
Yeah.
Again, the biography Chesterton writes, the audiobook of it is 4.5 hours, and here we spent 53 minutes, and his is a short biography. So there is so much more to tell of the life of St. Francis. This is what, again, my context is in student life, in putting forward heroes, first for myself, but then also for the students I work with. And so that's, the spiritual tradition of Francis is what appeals to me most. I probably should have prefaced with all that.
And the city now is beautiful. I mean, it's mostly...
Yeah, you've been, right?
Tourism. Yeah, it's tourism just around St. Francis and his large cathedral there. And it's a fun question to ask. How do you think he would have felt about this massive cathedral built in his name?
Is it elegant? Is it, or is, what's the word I'm looking for? Opulent, I guess?
Adorned. Yeah, it is kind of opulent. There's a lot of paintings and frescoes, but it still houses the continuing Franciscan order, which I think is great.
Yeah.
And it maintains a city, right? Assisi still kind of runs because of a lot of tourism centered around him.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city with some really nice restaurants. So if you want to go and have an incredible view and a really nice, what was the word that
Fraticelli?
Fraticelli?
Yum, yum.
Some really nice fraticelli.
No, you don't want to talk about Fraticelli and Sisi there.
not a huge fan.
Speaking of, what were the Fraticelli? Do you remember what their heresy was?
So St. Francis had this life of poverty, and he did that again because of the good that he had received and he wanted to give back. That was the quote from earlier. Well, the Fraticelli come after Francis's death, and they essentially take that the step further to say, actually, property is immoral. Property is bad, and no one should have any of it. And so, I don't know if heresy is the right word for it. It was an order that was. I actually don't know what the
condemned.
I was going to say excommunicated, but I don't actually know if that's anyway. I don't. They were deemed like not orthodox.
They were put down.
So, yeah.
Who was the leader of that? Was it Tyler Durden?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, sure.
But I thought the Fraticelli had some like sexy thing too.
Probably. If you read The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, they talk about the Fraticelli.
That's a great book.
It's a great book. The ending is a bummer, but it's kind of the point. Anyway, they talk about the Fraticelli as a part of that. But The Name of the Rose is also about the, I guess they were heresy trials because they recount them in kind of vivid detail. So anyway, Fraticelli, not good dudes, even though they were kind of based on the ideas of Francis, but they took it too far. Chesterton covers them at the very end and says that the Fraticelli...
Well, they're like slaughtering property owners and this kind of thing.
That's pretty weird to take a saint's ideas too far. Is that the first time that's happened?
Yeah, probably the only time that ever had it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said this before with Augustine, but Augustine's theology is used to justify the Crusades, which I guess we'll talk about next episode. So anyway.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, all these poor saints being taken out of context.
That's why I'm proud to be part of Mueller, where he didn't present a theology at all.
Yes,
so
kind of fair.
Just prayed a lot and helped kids.
Yeah,
so.
That's why having read his autobiography, I think his will be the hardest episode to spend 50 minutes on.
For sure.
Man, his autobiography is literally just, I needed something, I prayed for it. I got it.
Yeah,
delivered.
Over and over again.
It's like the Amazon of prayer. It's amazing.
but it is bonkers. Anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah, it's great.
The story is great. So anyway, that is a
cool.
brief introduction to St. Francis of Assisi.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Graham.
So this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. If you have any questions or concerns or things you want us to cover or any more submissions to Classical Stuff Bingo, you can email us at classicalstuff@veritasacademy.net. You can tweet at us at Classical Stuff, CLSSCAL Stuff on Twitter. You can find our episodes on classicalstuff.net. And
a quick note, if you are looking for some of our earlier episodes, those can still be found on our website, classicalstuff.net. They have rolled off of iTunes. I think we're starting around episode 7 now.
Just keep scrolling.
And so it's going to keep on going that way. We can only have about 100 episodes listed, but you can find our early stuff on our website.
Cool.
It's still there.
That is it.
Roll. Well, and this is the Classical Stuff guys signing off.
Signing off.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.